light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I wanted to share a few thoughts about ignorance and apathy and coping with that, especially within religious institutions. To begin this, I wanted to share an excerpt from a book by Reverend Sylvia Pennington called Ex-Gays There Are None, referring to the theological push by some religions and denominations to encourage gay people to simply not be gay. Very psychologically unsound process. I mean, if I believe that God has made people to be gay or straight or whatever God has made them to be, and it's more to be discovered rather than to be decided according to the whims and preferences of human theology, which is what makes this whole discussion so important. I've met men who have been struggling spiritually intensely because their church and their understanding of sacred text and so forth convinces them that they cannot be what in fact they find themselves to be, or that God disapproves somehow, as if God and the church were synonymous, when in fact they're absolutely not the same thing. There are so many ways that churches have put forth that they are speaking for God in ways that I'm quite certain God absolutely did not authorize. Some of the more obvious examples, I suppose, could even be things like the Crusades and horrific wars and all sorts of things that were done in the name of religion. And of course, the perpetrators insisted they were acting, as God wanted them to. And I'm quite sure God was sitting in heaven or wherever saying, "Where did you get that?" In any case, the focus of the discussion is dealing with the ignorance and the apathy that in many religious institutions there are people who think that it's not their issue, so they ignore it and do nothing about it and do not call their religious leaders to be accountable for the effects of theology upon human lives. That when a theology teaches someone to hate himself or herself, that is not a theology of wisdom and love, which are in my understanding, are the two fundamental, most descriptive qualities of God. But in this book, Reverend Pennington talks about the struggles of gay men to be theologically satisfactory to their churches and the enormous pain and anguish that brought to their lives. On this note, I wanted to begin this discussion by sharing with you the text of a suicide note that was left behind. To those left with the question, why did he do it? I loved life and all that it had to offer to me each day. I loved my job and my clients. I loved my friends and thank God for each one of them. I loved my little house and would not have wanted to live anywhere else. All this looks like the perfect life, yet I must not let this shadow the problem I have in my life. At one time, not too long ago, that was all that really mattered in my life, what pleased me and how it affected me. Now that I have turned my life over to the Lord, and the changes came one by one, the above statements mean much more to me. And I am pleased that I can say those statements with all the truth and honesty that is within me. However, to make this short, I must confess there were things in my life that I could not gain control of. No matter how much I prayed and tried to avoid temptation, I continually failed. It is this constant failure that has made me make the decision to terminate my life here on earth. I do this with the complete understanding that life is not mine to take. I know it is against the teachings of our Creator, but my failure is also against the teaching of our Creator. No man is without sin, this I realize. I will cleanse myself of all sin as taught to me by His Word, yet I must face my Lord with the sin of murder. I believe Jesus died and paid the price for that sin too. I know I shall have everlasting life with Him by departing this world now, no matter how much I love it. My friends, my family, if I remain, it could possibly allow the devil the opportunity to lead me away from the Lord. I love life, but my love for the Lord is so much greater. The choice is simple. I'm not asking you to sanction my actions. That is not the purpose of writing this at all. It is for the express purpose of allowing each one who will read this to know how I weighed things in my own mind. I don't want you to think that I alone should have been the perfect person, without sin. That would be ridiculous. It is the continuing lack of strength and or obedience and or willpower to cast aside certain sins. To continually go before God and ask forgiveness and make promises you know you can't keep is more than I can take. I feel it is making a mockery of God and all He stands for in my life. Please know that I am extremely happy to be going to the Lord. He knows my heart and knows how much I love life and all that it has to offer. But He knows I love Him more. That is why I believe I will be with Him in paradise. I regret if I bring sorrow to those who are left behind. If you get your heart in tune with the Word of God, you will be as happy about my transfer as I am. I also hope this answers sufficiently the question why. May God have mercy on my soul. A brother and a friend, Jack McIntyre. Obviously, I don't know, since this person was gone by the time this note was found, whether the author changed the name, whether that's the person's real name or not. I guess what stands out to me is that it is a specific name. This is not a category. This is not a fictional compilation. This is a real person. This is someone who obviously valued a perception of the truth, written by an author, a minister who also valued truth. So much so that in her own quest for God's opinion, if you will, of gay and lesbian people, her first book was actually entitled as the protest in her prayer, when God kept leading her to gay people to minister to them, and she kept saying, "But Lord, they're gay," as if that was a problem, and God kept saying, "So?" It's my understanding that when we do pass to the other side, when we return to being spirits in God's presence, that we leave behind our gender, our race, our orientation, our disabilities, anything that is unique to this physical body, our hair color. I don't know exactly how we'll recognize each other when we get there, but I suppose it will be much more a matter of some sort of sensing of love and wisdom and energy and shared memories, that somehow when we look at each other we will see the points of commonality in a very different way that doesn't depend upon our physical characteristics. If we are not taking our gender with us, it would be fairly impossible to take our orientation as well. If gender, orientation, race, etc. are qualities confined to the limitations of this life, it hardly makes sense that they would be any basis for any sort of eternal judgment. All that being noted, I think what God is most looking at is someone's commitment to wisdom and to love and to truth, to kindness, to all the different things that manifest the Spirit of God within any person of any religion. To meet someone who is genuinely loving, who is genuinely peaceful, who is genuinely wise, and understand that in all likelihood none of those qualities have come easily, but that they are aspects of self-development that take great perseverance and great dedication. The theological problem that was brought out in that suicide note, though, is a man who truly loved God, who had vibrant spirituality apparently, and yet saw the physical as being in such complete conflict. It was specifically because of the theology that he was taught and that he embraced that he found this conundrum, this impossible dichotomy, this impossible juxtaposition of who he was spiritually and who he was physically. basing his life and orienting his life around a theology that disallowed the existence of gay people, even though gay and lesbian people have been part of the human spectrum for thousands of years. What exactly causes it? I suppose there's definitely some sort of genetic element in it, but that's a whole discussion more for a scientist than for this particular show. The challenge for each of us, within ourselves and within those around us, is dealing with the ignorance and the apathy. The people who say, this isn't my issue, I don't know anyone who's gay, well, every time they say that, any gay person they know who's within earshot will feel that much more self-conscious and that much more inhibited about ever speaking up and saying, well, actually you do because I am. And to which the person would probably respond, you? I would have never thought you were. I've had various people tell me that when I mention about having high-functioning autism, that I would have never guessed. I really don't see anything autistic about you. Well, I went through the various testing because of other circumstances of my life, and it was confirmed that, yes, I do have high-functioning autism. In 5 out of 6 areas, I tested absolutely positive for high-functioning autism. When I was a child, I was very late in learning to talk, and then I went from not talking almost immediately to being the little professor, reading full-length novels all through elementary school, and being intellectually ahead of my age group for the rest of my life. I never really fit in. And it wasn't that I was trying to be one or the other. I was simply embracing the truth of myself. I was embracing whatever I found inside. In a similar sort of way, I knew from the time I was 4 that I was fundamentally different. But because the world in which I grew up was so, well, being gay was so not talked about, that I didn't know what I was. I knew I was different, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And when I finally figured it out in my early adult years, it was kind of like, oh, well, now everything makes sense. Why didn't somebody tell me? Why didn't somebody tell me? Because of the ignorance and apathy that would lead to suicide notes such as the one I just read. That there are numerous people in our world who would like to take a book, a sacred text, or a text regarded as sacred, even though it's been translated by literally thousands upon thousands of people over the years, over the centuries. And while I readily grant the presence of divine intervention, having studied several different foreign languages, I know there are a myriad of subtleties between one word and another, and between the understandings of one people and place and time and those of another. Consequently, it becomes really, really risky to base anything too terribly specific upon a text that was written at least a couple thousand years ago and transcribed multiple times through multiple languages. It kind of reminds me of the time that a number of other students and I, while in college, we all knew different foreign languages. And so one day in the cafeteria we decided to play a game of telephone with going in and out of different languages. And it's kind of a reference to the way rumors used to happen across telephone lines of things not being repeated quite accurately, as one person repeated to another. So we started a phrase at one end of the table and whispered it to the second person in English. The second person translated it into German and whispered it to the next person, who translated it back into English and whispered it to the next person, who translated it into Spanish and then whispered it to the next person, who translated it back into English and whispered to the next person, who translated into French and whispered to the next person, who translated back in English and whispered to the last person. And obviously, going through that many shifts, the people at the two ends had completely different phrases. And it wasn't because anyone intended to tell a lie or intended to be inaccurate. They simply applied the very best understanding of language that they could to the particular task. I understand that the divine puts inspiration within individuals. The problem with the divine, an infinite being of greatest wisdom and greatest love, attempting to communicate through a human being is that the divine cannot express anything greater than that particular person's mastery of language. And if that person was a highly educated person who wanted to communicate in multiple languages, that would only make it more confusing. There is no human language that can accurately convey what are genuinely divine and transcendent concepts. We do the best we can, and to the extent that we move toward wisdom and love, I think we're on the right path, or at least within the right ballpark, shall we say. But to me, because of what I understand the divine mystery to be, there needs to be a consistency. That if there is love and if there is wisdom, that it does not produce things like self-annihilation, that it does not lead to suicide. And the suicide really occurred only because this man was in conflict with his theology. It wasn't that there was some horrendous evil that would be prevented by him committing suicide, except that he had absolutely demonized the gay part of himself. This book is about Reverend Pennington working with gay people, trying to nurture their spiritual health, and finding again and again and again she would meet a gay man who was spiritually vibrant and alive and a loving and wise and kind and generous person, all the fruits of the Spirit you can name. And then they would be told, but you can't be gay, and they would turn into a miserable, depressed, and ultimately suicidal person. And the more time she saw it, the more she understood, this is wrong. It's just wrong. This cannot be what God intended for a human life. Because it would take them away from being loving and away from being wise and away from expressing prayer and joy and worship in all the most beautiful ways. And they would be consumed with this struggle that was really against nothing more than a human bias. I understand there will probably be many people, or maybe a few people, I don't know, maybe they don't watch my show. There may be many people watching the show who would disagree with this completely and insist that being gay is wrong. At one time, being a woman meant that you were property. Being a woman meant that you were less than a man. In other situations, it was exactly the opposite, and the men were less than the women. Each has something to offer. Each is a complementary part of the whole of creation. When we get into these hierarchies of saying whose answer is more right than somebody else's, instead of simply saying what answers produce wisdom and love in your life, to what extent do you find your capacity for love and your capacity for wisdom to be enhanced by whatever methods or choices or tools you utilize? Those are the things that really define what is going on in our souls. It's not the hairstyle, it's not who you love or even how you love, it's that you love. It's that love is genuinely love. Love is love is love. It's it's unconditional. It's something that reaches for the best in ourselves and reaches for the best in each other and reaches for the mysterious best transcendence that is beyond us. To understand that we are by no means perfect. We're still learning, we're still developing, we're still growing. That if you find that an orientation is something that, if you find an orientation or anything else, I guess, that is somehow impossible to resist, it seems to be hardwired in. At one time, it was considered really, really bad to be left-handed. Thankfully, we've gotten to the point, I think, that left-handed persons are not regarded as any less than right-handed persons. That, for the most part, hair color and eye color are not value judgments anymore. They're simply personal characteristics. In loving someone, it is not about the gender of the person you're loving, but it's about the genuineness of the love. That regardless of the gender, it's about valuing that person and their limitless potential and their multidimensional truth, and finding it beautiful and fascinating and learning from it, and learning how to bring the most love and wisdom you can to it, and to make every example of humanity, regardless of ability or disability, regardless of being born without legs or whatever, to simply say, what is the most wisdom and love that we can channel through this being? And to allow that to be the measure. Dealing with the ignorance and the apathy in the world around us, though, is sometimes a very, very difficult and adversarial process. The thing, I guess, I would say to someone who finds themselves in such a crux, such a place of a crucible of pressure, and you have to believe this, no, you have to believe this, no, you have to believe this, to take a personal retreat, to get away from it all and sit down and pray. And if it takes a couple weeks or whatever, take some time off, and in prayer to say, oh, divine mystery, reveal yourself to me in the way you choose, in whatever way you know to be most appropriate to me. And I've heard what all these other people say is the answer. I want to know your answer in the deepest place of my being, and then to listen, and to keep listening until the answer comes. And I assure you it will. God loves people who listen. It's kind of like one of my favorite lines in the movie Steel Magnolias. A character played by Dolly Parton makes the comment, God don't care what church you go to as long as you show up. And I said, yeah, it's the showing up part, showing up for that conversation, showing up in spite of the world's ignorance and apathy, and wherever possible, being the evidence of a better way than what has been preached to you, being the evidence that God is not synonymous with the church. God may or may not choose to reveal God's self through the church, depending on which individuals within the church are listening. I think perhaps every minister in the world, though, would agree with me that within every congregation there is always a certain number who are listening and a certain number who are absolutely not. As one witty poet put it, poet or minister or somebody, going into a church doesn't make you a Christian or a person of faith any more than going into a garage makes you a car. To be a car, to be a person, it's what is within you. And allowing, as even Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. And to allow that kingdom within you to become a primary measuring reference point, a primary voice in discernment, because there are so many who are essentially preaching according to their own biases. If I have a bias, I suppose it would be that a person is a person is a person, that love and wisdom are the two primary defining qualities of the divine, and that there are magical moments in life that make spirituality worth embracing, within which, for a moment, the fingertips of the divine and the fingertips of humanity touch. And every time it does, lives are changed. And it fills the person with awe. That to me is an experience of God, but the God that is truly God, not the God that is merely reported as such by various theological perspectives. Ultimately, as I said in one of my monthly newsletters, I don't really have an argument with institutionalized religion existing. I simply think that we need to get back to using our religions to nurture our relationship with God, instead of using our relationship with God to nurture our religions. It may be that for you, God is the beauty and wonder of a photo from the Hubble telescope. That for, I think Albert Einstein expressed that in the sense of being in awe of the universe, yes, he was a spiritual man and he did believe in God, but that which is God, I think Einstein understood very well, was not exactly what the church said was God. And that is part of the ignorance and the apathy with which we need to struggle. It's part of our growth to do the struggle. It's part of our growth to challenge our churches and our ecclesiastical leaders to reach for something beyond the theology, that if God is no bigger than human theology, God isn't big enough to be God. It's got to be something more. It's the infinite, and we are the finite. It's the eternal, and we are the temporal. And the temporal and the finite reaching, even for brief moments, to touch the infinite and the eternal makes all the difference in life and the unfolding of life on this planet. When something more limited than that creates a cage, it seems to me that that's what needs to be left behind. It's about freedom and expansion. And as I began to contemplate love, trying to understand that more than I do, it seemed to me that love always expands and fear always contracts. So when something is contracting, when it's becoming a tight grip around your neck and you feel like you can't breathe, there's probably something in it that really is not good for you and doesn't belong there. And it's time to return to love, to an experience of love in some sense, not as an object, but as a genuinely multidimensional human being experiencing the multidimensionality of love, and knowing that that love is what holds the power to heal all brokenness, and that as much as power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, love is the one exception. Love is the power that will bring all of the other powers into balance. But if love does not proceed, nothing good will follow.